Okay, let me just say this right up front. I like soup. I like soup quite a lot. Hello interwebs, welcome back to my reviews because we're going to be talking about the first episode of Doctor Who Flux, the series premiere of Series 13. To be honest with you, I'm always confused because the UK calls series, and the United States we call seasons, and I get confused whether I call the first episode of a season a series premiere or a season premiere. Look, I do not understand the United Kingdom. Y'all are weird. I mean, to be fair, I don't understand the United States either. We're all just weird and it's all made up. Regardless, let's talk about the series premiere of Doctor Who Flux, the Halloween Apocalypse. Ooh. So let me kind of give a little bit of kind of a brief overview of how I'm feeling going into the season, because I think it's going to inform a lot of how I'm going to be reviewing this season going forward, or series going forward. And in that, like a lot of Doctor Who fans, I've been kind of a little bit down on the Chris Chibnal era of the show. Well, I'm not as like vitriolic or hating on it as a few other folks have been on the internet. Even folks who are like talking good faith. I'm not even talking about the like grifters who are just like, oh, it's too woke and oh no, SJW is ruining my Doctor Who. I'm not even talking about those people, but there are people who actually have like good faith criticism of the show that are much more vitriolic on it as a whole, which is understandable. I can understand why they'd be frustrated with the series. I'm a little bit more upbeat on it in that I like a few elements here and there, but on the whole, I do think it has been a clear step down from the Stephen Moffat and Russell T Davies era. And also, with that being said, now that we know that this is both the final season for Chibnal and Jodie Whitaker, as well as the fact that we also know that Russell T Davies is coming back to run Doctor Who very soon, right after this, it kind of leaves this season in this weird place where it's like, oh, we're already kind of down on it because it's part of this era of the show that, or at least I am down on it because it's part of this era of the show that hasn't excited me as much as the show has before. And then the next guy coming in down the road has me kind of very excited for the show. And so it leaves Flux in a kind of state of flux, to use that sort of very clear metaphor right there. However, I will say I am somewhat excited for it, or at least I was going into this episode somewhat excited for it, because while I have not loved Chris Chibnall's era on the show, this is a 6-episode season, and it's telling a serialized story over those 6 episodes. And I do think that Chris Chibnall is a writer and creator who is in his wheelhouse telling much more long-form, intricate, interwoven stories. I mean, if you look at all of his other work that he's done on different shows and series, he's someone who likes to tell serialized stories. And so Doctor Who leaning into that for this final season would be something that would lean into his strengths as a writer, and I'm really hoping that's the case, because then it'll allow him and Jodie to at least go out on a high note. If it won't fix all the other problems that we've had with this show, it at least will allow it to go out on a high note. So all that being said, I'm coming into this with both high hopes, but not a lot of high expectations, if that makes any sense. Like, I hope it will do really well, but ultimately if he doesn't, I'm kind of like, okay, I'll be fine. So all of that is kind of what I'm feeling going into this series premiere of the show, and honestly, looking at this episode for what it is, and by the way, I'm going to go full spoilers into this because it's going to be hard to talk about this without going into full spoilers. Looking at it, I can tell that this episode is very much meant to be laying the groundwork for the rest of the season. There's so many storylines going on here that are just like little snippets of things that are clearly going to be coming back up in future episodes of the season that it's hard for me to sit here and be like, oh, that was interesting, oh, that was good. It's just sort of like, oh, they're touching upon each individual thing without really going far into it, just sort of being like, and this is going to come up, and this is going to come up, and this is going to come up. And so it's just really difficult for me to judge like pretty much a third of this episode on any sort of merit because I don't have awareness of what's going to be coming after it. That all being said, there are some things in this episode that I liked on its own terms, and think it's showing clear signs of some improvements on some of the criticism I had from previous seasons. And then there's also some stuff here that has me worried that he's going to lean into the same issues and problems that Chris Chibnall has had throughout his entire era. Let's talk about positives first here. I actually really, really enjoyed the Doctor and Yaz's dynamic throughout this episode because right from the start, we get this sort of opening bit with the Doctor and Yaz in a kind of trap scenario going after this dog-like guy, the lupine guy. I forget his name, like Kazadian, the dog-like makeup dude. They're in this trap, and I really like the banter that's going back and forth between the Doctor and Yaz, because we do get this sense that they have been traveling together on their own for a while since we last saw them in the New Year's special. And I appreciated that because it's been really difficult with 3 other companions on this show so far for the Doctor to have a really strong, specific, like, dynamic with any of them. And so coming in, you know, at least a few adventures and a significant chunk of time down the road, it really allows us to get a little bit more invested in the dynamic here. And Yaz, being someone who is able to, throughout this episode, kind of call the Doctor on her crap, has me very pleased to actually see that, because it's then like, okay, there's an actual dynamic here where they understand each other enough. You get to have some fun with Yaz sort of like tossing the Doctor the hammer and then banging on the TARDIS, and they sort of like have this familiarity with each other. But also Yaz is more than willing to be like, hey, you're not telling me everything when it comes to this, why we're chasing this guy. And so I just deeply appreciated that depthful dynamic here throughout this. Also, I did enjoy some of the sequences as the Doctor and Yaz are chasing after this sort of dog dude. I think the trap at the beginning, while the CGI in the opening segment did feel a little bit like cheap and blah, like the visuals were not very strong for me, I did think they were a lot of fun. Like I might have been Scottish, referring to the 12th Doctor when she like programmed the handcuffs and things like that. Like they're back and forth. Like I was having a lot of fun with that. The computer bit when they're in Dan's house and like, oh, this isn't his computer. All of that was just a lot of fun, and I did really enjoy it, and it kind of did like the back and forth between the two of them. And I also did, again, like seeing Yaz's frustration in that one sequence when they finally get on the ship, and Yaz is like, the Doctor just tells her what to do, and Yaz just like, oh yeah, I guess I'll just go and do it now. And you're getting those little hints there. So all of that I think is particularly excellent. However, one quick thing that does concern me a little bit when it comes to Yaz and the Doctor is that I know that there is a huge shipping fandom between the Doctor and Yaz, and a lot of people that want to see Yaz and the Doctor end up getting together. And there is a moment that feels like it was alluding to it early in the episode where the Doctor and Yaz land in a bed together. And look, I'm okay with it either way, whether the Doctor and Yaz get together or not. I'm not sort of a huge shipper of the two of them, but I really hope that that wasn't a moment that was meant to be a queer baiting moment with the show sort of winking at the audience to try and get the shipping fandom all excited about it, but not actually paying it off. It wasn't a huge moment, but seeing the Doctor and Yaz in a bed together is something that I know is going to excite the shipping fandom, and I really hope that this isn't the showrunners trying to tease at that to get people excited in a cheap way that takes advantage of the LGBTQ community's excitement and desire for representation, as most queer baiting is. So that's something that I'm going to be keeping an eye on going throughout this season, and we'll see how it goes. So it's not a big deal yet, but it was something that was kind of making me like look sidelined at the episode up for a second there. The other major big sequence of this episode is us getting to know the new companion, Dan. Now, talking about Dan on his own terms, I liked him. We only got a couple scenes with him in the opening. We clearly get a sense that he loves Liverpool. I get it. There are people who are just really in love with their history, and he also seems like a dude who sadly doesn't have much going else on in his life, so he probably would sort of get invested in the museum. And so it was interesting. I think the performance was really, really strong here by the actor, and it really told me who this guy was, like a kind, caring, sweet dude who just doesn't have much going on. And so I thought that they instantly established that and made me like him right off the bat. And then when the dog guy shows up and like kidnaps him, I thought that whole bit and banter and back and forth, and actually showing his intelligence when he's sort of able to deduce certain things with the dog guy, the Luparian, I can't remember his name, but the Luparian guy, I thought that was also really good. Also, the dog makeup was, I don't want to hate on it because it's cheesy in a way that like Russell T Davies' Doctor Who is cheesy, and I always enjoyed that. It feels just weird in the context of this era of the show, which has been a little bit more like modern sensibilities, whereas this dog character is very like very cheesy with the look of him. And so I like it, but it feels out of place within this era of the show, if that makes any sense. So that's just something that I wanted to quick mention. But I did like Dan on the whole here. My big problem, though, with him is that we're setting him up. And now we have this other companion, and just when I'm like finally feeling like, oh yeah, Yaz and the Doctor and that dynamic is starting to click with me, I know that Dan's going to come in and be this whole other character that I have to get to know. We only have 5 more episodes to really get to know him, along with all these other storylines that are coming up here too, that I'll talk about now. Like, we get this new girl, Claire, who is kind of being like a meeting the Doctor out of order thing that we've seen a few different times before, and sort of running into Yaz and the Doctor in the middle of their adventure. And I'm curious to see where that goes, but it's like, oh, okay, so here's another character that we're going to get to know that's going to have a sort of deep, depthful relationship with the Doctor that is also going to take time in the last 5 episodes away from what's going on here, unless she's being set up for something that Russell T Davies is going to do down the line, but I would be surprised if that was the case here. I don't really think they probably had enough time to talk that sort of stuff out before Russell T Davies even came in to decide what he wanted to do with Doctor Who going forward. But it was nice to see her, and I did like her sequence. Seeing the Weeping Angel was cool. I always enjoy the Weeping Angels, even if they are really overused. But it was kind of repetitive of stuff we've seen in Blink before, and kind of went on just a hair too long. And again, it's like another thing, like, okay, Weeping Angels are here now. And then on top of that, we also have this guy in this observation post as he's almost getting attacked by the Flux, and wiping him out or about to wipe him out. And he's going to be a regular character, so I've heard, going forward. So it's hard to judge him, and we know he's going to be here. We also get the Sontarans coming in here. We also have this dude in 200 years ago in Liverpool, Williamson, who's like building something in Liverpool that I'm sure is going to be some way to save against the Flux going forward or play into the plot in some way. It's just, there's a lot of disparate elements here that I'm like, you only have 5 episodes and there's a lot going on here that you're asking me to invest in, and I'm a bit nervous that it's just going to be taking on too much and not really giving me enough time to care about any of them. Like, this episode clearly showed, like, there's a lot going on, and it might just be like, oh, this is just all set up, but I just worry that I'm not going to end up having enough time to care about any of it. And it frustrates me because it's like, I'm just starting to care about Yaz and the Doctor. So all of that kind of worries me. However, the last 2 things that I want to talk about, I am much more positive on. We have this villain guy, who I'm just going to call the Prisoner right now, who seems particularly menacing. His introduction was, I think, really, really good. I like the hints that he's been here since the dawn of time. He's been biding his time and waiting to be able to, for his moment to escape. At this moment, he felt properly menacing, and his moments where he says "trick or treat, Doctor" to the Doctor reads this telepathic link. It's like, it shows like, okay, he has a relationship with her. And I'm very curious how this is going to tie in with what we've seen with the Timeless Child. I've not been a big fan of what the Timeless Child was and that whole storyline with the Doctor, because I think it chose and oneifies the Doctor too much, as I talked about in my review of that episode. But I did at least, I'm curious to see what their dynamic and relationship is, because clearly they have some sort of relationship that the Doctor doesn't remember, because she wiped her memory going back to the whole Timeless Child thing and doesn't remember her time beforehand. And since this guy clearly comes from the dawn of time, he probably has something to do with her prior life, prior to becoming, coming from wherever the Doctor came from, as that we learned in the end of the Timeless Child. So I'm curious to see how this is going to be built out. Again, it's one of those things that I can't really talk much about. I can only sort of guess at, but I liked their dynamic here, and I thought he was properly menacing, if a little bit too plasticky looking in the face. And I'm also curious to see what this is going to be built up on with this other version of this like female version of this guy that he goes and rescues, and how that's all being set up there. Again, another plot thread that I can't really talk about too much. And then also her kidnapping Dan's friend, who, by the way, I should say, it was really cool to see like nice, subtle, disability representation in this episode. I think we need more of that. Like, I would love to see more characters who are disabled, and, this lady, she doesn't have an arm, who just, like, it's not drawn attention to, and she's just there and is a character. That's awesome. Here for it. But I'm curious, again, where that storyline is going to go with her. And then the final thing that I thought was a clever little twist was the ultimate revelation that this dog guy, the Luparian, was there to save humanity. That he's there being like, the Flux is coming, it's destroying all of the galaxy, and we're here to save all of humanity. We all save just one person. I thought that was a clever little subversion and a clever little surprise, and so the Doctor able to utilize them to help save Earth, or at least build a shield around Earth as the Flux came, was really cool to see. So all of that comes down to, at the end of the episode, that it's hard for me to really judge. Like I've been kind of saying throughout all this, there's a bunch of interesting plot threads. I am concerned that there's too much We have like the Sontarans, the Weeping Angels, the Flux, and I wonder if this is going to be kind of like a Crisis on Infinite Earths type situation here, where it's like, okay, we're gonna shove every single Doctor Who thing into a gigantic blender, and it's all just gonna come crashing in on itself all together, and there's also gonna be this big bad that we're gonna face, and then all of Doctor Who's enemies are gonna come back together to fight him, to fight this guy. So it feels like very much a setting up like a universe-ending, we're all gonna have to band together, and every single potpourri of Doctor Who-dom is gonna come to fight this dude. Which can be interesting, but ultimately feels like it's a kind of like a galactic stake story sort of thing that I've seen before, and just kind of like goes through playing the greatest hits of Doctor Who, which is something that Chris Chibnal is kind of known for doing. He doesn't really tend to, in my mind, come up with many new ideas. He just sort of takes old ideas and remixes them, and that feels like where this is headed. And so at the end of the day, my mind is sort of still unsure of where I feel on this episode and the state of this sort of season so far, right after this first episode, because I feel like it's hard for me to judge. I think there's a lot of setup here that could pay off well or could pay off not well, but I think my biggest concern is it's just going to be too much and ultimately feel like very lot of bombast and not a lot of emotional hook, and a lot of for me to sink my teeth into. And so that's my concern going forward, having seen the first episode of Flux. But I feel like I'm getting a little bit repetitive at this point, so thank you so much for watching this review. I'd love to hear all your thoughts about Doctor Who Flux Episode 1, The Halloween Apocalypse. What did you like about it? What did you dislike about it? Let me know all below. But beyond all of that, thank you so much for watching. I hope that you, as always, live long and stay sexy.